Good morning. My aims this morning are twofold. I've got a huge amount of material to get through, so I'm going to need to speak fairly quickly, and I'm going to need you to keep up and be a very good audience for me this morning. My aims are as follows. Firstly, I want to explore the relationship between science and religion with you, because it's my view that the true relationship between science and religion is very often misportrayed in the media, and through the works of some of the leading intellectual atheists that we hear a lot from these days. My second aim is to give you a little taste of what thinking about the philosophy of religion feels like. In the SIG form here, we offer a course in the philosophy of religion and religious ethics. I've taught the philosophy side of that for 3 years now, and much of the content of my presentation this morning dovetails quite neatly with what we study in the lower sixth, when we do a dedicated science and religion unit in the philosophy of religion course. So as you're at that point in your lives now where you're deciding whether to stay here and do A-levels here, whether to go elsewhere, or what kind of A-level subjects you want to do, I want you to have an idea of the kind of thing that you would be doing if you were to stay here in the sixth form and do philosophy of religion and ethics with us. This is my starting point. When I was around 6 years old, quite a small boy, I was taken by my parents to see this dinosaur at the British Museum of Natural History in London. Many of you have seen it too. And as a small boy, I was absolutely overwhelmed by the sight of this creature. You come into the front door of the Natural History Museum in London, and it greets you as you enter. It's Diplodocus, one of the longest dinosaurs that ever lived, about the length of 3 double-decker buses placed end to end. And as a young boy, I was absolutely in awe of this creature. I was mesmerized by it. And it put in me a wonder and a desire to find out more about this natural world, the world in which we live, the organisms that populate it now, and the organisms that have populated it in prehistory. That really kick-started my interest in science. It put in me an insatiable desire to find answers to my deep questions about the kind of reality within which I found myself. It led to me in time doing science GCSEs, then science A-levels. I went to university and I studied a biology degree at Oxford. But there's a second strand running through my life as well. Not only am I a scientist, but I'd also call myself a religious person. I have religious convictions. When I was around the age of 14, I went to my local Methodist church one Sunday, and I heard what I can only call an authoritative summons to faith. I felt that there was a God who was addressing me personally and calling me to put my trust in him. And that event led to me wanting to find out more about this God, his character, his nature, his purposes. It led to me in time doing a second degree in theology. And so when I started at the school, I was able to offer 2 different kinds of subjects. I was able to offer sciences and I was able to offer religion and teach both. And when I tell people that I teach both science and RE, they often raise an eyebrow, give me a strange look, and say something like, science and religion? That's an interesting combination. And it always fascinates me, the response that people give when they find out what it is I teach at Truro School. Where does that come from? Where does that surprise come from? I think I know. I think the answer is that very many people have in their minds the idea that science and religion are pulling in 2 quite different directions. Or to change the metaphor slightly, that science and religion are at war with one another. They're at loggerheads with one another. In his preposterous book, Angels and Demons, Dan Brown writes the following about Professor Robert Langdon, who is a professor of symbology at Harvard University. We read this: Langdon had spent his career studying religious history, and if there was one recurring theme, it was that science and religion had been oil and water since day one, arch enemies, unmixable. What a load of rubbish. It's demonstrably factually untrue. Because when you go back through history and you have a look at some of the leading intellectual lights that have been the architects of a scientific worldview, you see that these were men and women who were also profoundly religious. The perceived conflict between science and religion is a peculiarly modern phenomenon. It's strange. You don't need to go back very far through history to see that many leading scientists in history have regarded science and religion as compatible with one another. More than that, they complement one another. They form a single coherent view of reality and need to be held together. This is my conviction. And I want to share with you this morning my own perception of the true relationship between science and religion, in the hope that this presentation will inform your own understanding on that subject. In order to do that, I want to go back into the 19th century. The 19th century was an enormously important century in terms of informing the way that we think today. And if you go back to the 19th century, you see that then science and religion was regarded as going hand in hand. People held the two together. And I come back to another dinosaur, another of my favourites. This dinosaur is the first dinosaur ever to be scientifically described. It was described in 1824 in a paper by this man, Professor William Buckland, Professor of Geology at Oxford University. This dinosaur was absolutely immense. It was huge. It grew to about 9 metres in length. And so Buckland named it Megalosaurus, which literally means large lizard. I want to tell you a little about William Buckland, because he's something of a hero of mine, but he's not someone that you tend to hear very much about these days. William Buckland was a brilliant scientist. He was elected to the Royal Society in London, our most prestigious scientific body, when he was only 34 years old. He became president of the Geological Society. He was a professor of geology at Oxford University, as I've already mentioned. And one of the reasons why I like him so much is because he was also extremely eccentric. He was a brilliantly eccentric teacher. One of the reasons I love studying the history of ideas so much is that as you go back in time, you become acquainted with lots of fascinating individuals, and William Buckland was one of them. In 1821, he investigated the remains of various animals that had been found in a particular cavern up in Yorkshire. And he saw that many of the bones of creatures that were found there had teeth marks in them. And he put forward a hypothesis. This is what scientists do. He hypothesized that at some point in the distant past, we had hyenas in the British Isles. In order to test this hypothesis, he went and bought a hyena. You could do that in the 19th century. He imported it from Africa over to this country, and the Buckland family kept it in their home as a pet. One day, a visitor to the Buckland residence turned round because he heard some crunching going on beneath the chair on which he was sitting. Turning around, he saw the hyena tucking into the family guinea pigs. It gives you an idea of the kind of chaos that filled the Buckland home. William Buckland also bought a bear. He bought a bear cub. Again, you could do this in the 19th century. Go out, buy yourself a bear. He kept it in his rooms at Christ Church College, Oxford. He used to dress it up in one of these, the commoner's gowns. This is my own gown when I was at university. He'd dress it up in the gown and cap, and he'd take it to official functions. And the bear would join the professors at Christ Church, Oxford, in their wine parties. Until the dean of Christ Church got very annoyed at this. Buckland had to take the bear home and keep it as a family pet. He used to put it on horseback and ride with his bear into the local village, until one day the bear broke free from the lead or whatever it was on, went into the local sweet shop and terrorised the women who were there. They were so terrified, and William Buckland was so embarrassed, he ended up giving his bear away to London Zoo, where it died not long afterwards. William Buckland once boasted that he'd eaten his way through much of the animal kingdom. One time he was visiting a cathedral on the continent, and there they venerated a particular splash of what they thought was blood that was on the cathedral floor. They thought that this blood was the blood of the martyrs. And William Buckland got down on the floor. He licked it, gave it a little taste, and said, "I know what it is. It's bat's urine." He knew exactly what bat's urine tasted like, because he'd had a chance to taste it beforehand. He was the world's leading expert on fossil poo. Yes, he was a truly eccentric man, but he was also a very religious man. He was a priest in the Church of England. He became Dean of Westminster. He rose to having quite a high office in the church. He believed that the study of God's words, which we find in the Bible, and the study of God's works, which we find in nature, should be held together. And that a man of true intellect, a man of true learning, should devote himself to the study of both. We see this in Buckland's contributions to a collection of books called the Bridgewater Treatises. The Earl of Bridgewater died back in the 19th century and left a very large sum of money in order to resource the publication of a series of books on this title, on the power, wisdom, and goodness of God as manifested in the creation. Many leading intellectuals in the 19th century contributed volumes to this particular collection of books. Among them was William Buckland. In 1836, he contributed 2 volumes on geology, the culmination of almost 5 years' work. And his chapter titles give us an interesting insight into how the mind of this great man worked. For we find in his volumes chapter titles including Proofs of Design in the Structure of Fossil Vertebrated Animals, Proofs of Design in the Structure of Fossil Vegetables, Proofs of Design in the Effect of Disturbing Forces on the Strata of the Earth. This is the central idea. William Buckland believed that when you look at nature, you see evidence of design wherever you care to look. You see evidence of the handiwork of a great intelligence who we call God. And William Buckland was walking in the footsteps of another great intellectual who came before him, someone called William Paley, someone who we actually study here in the lower Sip. William Paley's great book was published in 1802. He called it Natural Theology, or Natural Religion. And William Paley's theory was this, that wherever you look in nature, you see evidence of such great complexity that the only possible explanation for the existence of that complexity is a supreme intelligence, and that supreme intelligence goes by the name of the Christian God. William Paley's work was one of the most significant works of theology ever published in the English language. It was widely read in the 19th century. It was part of the core curriculum of both Oxford and Cambridge universities. It was widely debated, widely discussed. And William Paley's argument was an extremely famous one, is an extremely famous one. It goes something like this. Suppose one day you're crossing a heath and your foot pitches up against a stone. And the question enters your mind, how did this stone come to be here? That wouldn't be a very interesting question to ask. For all you'd know, the stone had lain there forever. But suppose you continue on your way and your foot pitches up against not a stone, but a watch. And again, the question enters your mind, how did this thing come to be here? You would not give the same answer for the watch as you did for the stone, because when you look at the watch and you open up the back and you see its intricate workings, you see how all its parts are, in William Paley's own words, framed for a purpose. It immediately leads you to the conclusion that this thing must be designed. Look at the ordered complexity of this thing. Look at the perfection of its engineering. Look at how all the parts work together in order to accomplish a particular purpose. If the parts were rearranged in any other way, the watch would not work. This points to the existence of a watchmaker, a designer, a great intelligence. And William Paley said, now consider this question. When you look at nature, when you look at organs of complication and perfection, they bear a lot more resemblance to a watch than they do a stone. Just as we need to postulate the existence of a designer in order to explain the existence of a watch, so too do we need to postulate the existence of a designer in order to explain the existence of all the complex things that we see in the world of nature. It's a powerful argument. It's a very persuasive argument. William Paley's own favourite example was the human eye. I wonder if you know much about this structure. I believe it's not included on the GCSE biology syllabus any longer. Tremendous pity. But if you just consider for a moment the eye and the perfection of engineering that we observe when we care to study it. At the back of the eye is a layer of light-sensitive cells that make up the retina. When light falls on those light-sensitive cells, they trigger electrical impulses that are carried through the optic nerve to the brain, so you're able to build up a mental picture of whatever it is the eye is looking at. In front of the light-sensitive cells is a lens. The lens is held in place by suspensory ligaments, which are attached to ciliary muscles. The ciliary muscles can relax or they can contract. In so doing, they change the shape and the size of the lens. The lens is able to focus on objects that are close to the eye or far from the eye. In front of the lens is a hole, the pupil. The size of the pupil can also change. The iris enables it to dilate if you're in areas or places of low light intensity, or constrict if there's high light intensity. At the front of the eye, there's a protective covering called the cornea, a layer of skin called the conjunctiva over the top of that, and around the whole eye is the white stuff, the sclera, which enables the eye to hold its shape and protects it. It's a marvel of engineering. It's magnificent. Paley said if the parts were rearranged in any other way, the eye would not work. The eye clearly points to the existence of a supreme intelligence, a great designer who made it this way, and that designer is God. As I said, William Buckland, Professor of Geology at Oxford University, was walking in the footsteps of William Paley and used the same kind of argument in order to support his idea that God, the Christian God, truly exists. And Buckland's examples include the following. We're back to Megalosaurus. Look at the teeth of this animal. Look at how they're designed like steak knives. And William Buckland said, this is no accident. Clearly these teeth are designed for the purpose of bringing an end to unfortunate animals extremely quickly. And this points not just to the power of God who designed them this way, but also to his benevolence, his goodness. Any poor creature found writhing in the jaws of Megalosaurus would die extremely quickly before it had the chance to experience very much pain. What a great God we believe in. But this is another example of Buckland's that I want to spend a little bit more time on. This is Megatherium, the giant ground sloth. This animal, long since extinct, grew to colossal dimensions. It could grow to about 5.2 meters in height. That's me, stood in Chicago next to a fairly small specimen. You can go to the British Museum of Natural History in London, find a slightly larger specimen than that. The giant ground sloth was widely believed in the 19th century to be an embarrassment. One anatomist called it a bungled sketch of nature. This creature was so large, it couldn't run, it couldn't climb, it wouldn't have been able to have done very much at all, other than plod slowly around the landscape and perhaps scoop up roots and things in its paws. Surely this contradicted Paley's and Buckland's design argument. Surely the existence of such creatures at some point in the past pointed to the fact that there wasn't a God, there wasn't a designer. Buckland strongly disagreed. And one night in the Holywell Music Room at Oxford University, he lectured late into the night on the subject of Megatherium. And he started by introducing the animal to his audience, an animal that he called the most monstrous of the monstrous kind. And then, like a detective, piecing together lots of different strands of evidence, he showed how even the anatomical structure of Megatherium points to the existence of a supreme intelligence, a great designer. He said this, "Gentlemen, his teeth indicated a peculiarity of structure. They were not calculated to eat leaves or grass. They were not calculated to eat flesh. He was an eater of vegetables. What then remained for him but roots? He has a spade, and he has a hoe and a shovel in those 3 claws on his right hand. He is the prince of sappers and miners." Yes, this creature could not run, it could not climb, it could leap, but it was perfectly well adapted to its lifestyle. Concluding, Buckland said, its entire frame was an apparatus of colossal mechanism, adapted exactly to the work it had to do. We find again conclusive evidence of design, even in this creature. The kind of argument that I've been presenting to you today is often called a design argument for the existence of God. In philosophy of religion, we call it a teleological argument. And very many people find the argument extremely persuasive, even today. In my last school, I remember travelling back from a science trip one day with the head of science, and a pupil turned to him, not to me, to him, and asked the head of science, "Sir, do you believe in God?" Great question to ask on the coach coming back from a science trip. I recommend it. And my colleague hesitated for a moment, and he said, "You know, when I consider the complexity and the diversity of what we see in the natural world, I cannot help but think there's something or someone out there that made it just so." He wasn't a Christian, he wasn't a religious man at all, and yet he saw the power of this kind of argument.